Welcome to Wash Talk. I'm your host, Brian Ankney. Today my guest is Stuart Hammerschmidt. He's the president at Shore Corporation. Welcome, Stuart.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Wait, I want to get started. I got to ask you about Scooby-Doo. I hear that you are a Scooby-Doo fan. What's your favorite episode?
Oh, Hassle in the Castle,
Hassle in the Castle?
1969. Scooby, Shaggy, the rest of the gang gets trapped on an island, and it's haunted, and it's phenomenal. And Scooby-Doo has to get convinced to go after the bad guy, and they tell him to pretend he's John Wayne. And that's what gives him the courage to go after the ghost in the castle.
Nice. Now, is the ghost a real ghost, or is it a...
No, it's always somebody else.
It's always somebody else.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Stuart is a chemist, and today we're going to talk about, if you own a car wash, do you need to know chemistry? Maybe you do. We're going to find out. So, Stuart, tell us a little bit about your background and, your career path that got you to where you are today as the president of Shore Corporation.
Well, I have a degree in chemistry from the University of Pittsburgh. Originally, I wanted to be in the environmental business. So my first job out of college was Westinghouse Environmental and Geotechnical Services. I was an environmental consultant, and then a recession hit, and the first thing they do is get rid of all the consultants. So there was a company that was looking for a chemist because they had lost their chemist due to job transfer, and so I applied and was the quality control chemist. And the company was Shore Chemical at the time. It had recently been purchased by a group of investors. And Jack Shore, who was the founder, was still under contract. And my first day, they sat me next to him and said, everything that he knows, you learn. And he was a bench chemist, and a very good bench chemist at that. So as I stayed with the company, I moved up title to title to title. And eventually the president suggested I get an MBA at night. So I was like, I don't really need an MBA. He goes, well, we'll pay for half of it. I said, well, I guess I'm getting an MBA. So I went into my first class. It was business statistics. I had only taken statistics in chemistry. I'd never taken business statistics. And the professor handed out first page of the syllabus and said, download the rest of it from the internet. I got home and I told my wife, I said, we have to get a computer because apparently we need the internet. So after that, a couple years later, I was promoted to president. We moved our company, we were in the Strip District of Pittsburgh until March of 2020, when we started to move to a little town called Ambridge, which is outside of Pittsburgh. And COVID hit, everything was locked down, but thankfully, we were able to move our truck 4 times round trip every day due to lack of traffic. So we now have 50,000 square feet just outside of Allegheny County in Beaver County, right next to the Ohio River.
How many people work for you?
We have 21 on payroll right now. One's part-time. And we have about half working in the plant, and the other are admin and sales. Cool. And a couple of chemists. Well, let's rephrase that. We've got people working in the lab, and you have me. How's that?
Hey, fair enough. Let's talk about you mentioned right before COVID, you guys were moving. Let's talk about supply chain, because every industry has been affected by the supply chain, and a lot of us think about it because we see it on the news. There's no cars, there's no parts, there's no this, there's no that. How did that affect you in the chemical business?
Well, the supply chain issue was multi-faced when we were dealing with it. There were several aspects that a lot of people didn't know about, doesn't get press. But the big one, the one that affected the United States the most, was the Texas freeze. And that freeze, everybody says, well, the grid failed. Well, that's fine. You have chemical plants in Texas making raw materials that are designed to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and never shut down. And then all of a sudden, they shut down. So it's not like you pulled the plug on a microwave and you plug it back in and you hit start. These are multi-billion-dollar plants that were basically destroyed from the inside. It was a catastrophic failure on so many levels. And you just couldn't just start it up again. And so companies were claiming force majeure, contracts were thrown out the window, and you just couldn't get stuff. And it wasn't just Texas, it was also Louisiana. So that was the big one. The second one that was the big one was the Chinese lockdown. And when I say lockdown, COVID was only half of it. The Olympics was the bigger portion. So about October 15th, right before the Olympics in 2020, China decided to shut down phosphate production in the prefects surrounding the area. And what happened, because they didn't want dirty snow. Because if you have dirty snow, the snow melts. So by shutting down production completely, you put a strain on the system because China is one of the largest phosphate producers. And the Americans, because of Texas, hadn't recovered yet, so you had twofold problems. And then on top of that, they had draconian lockdown for COVID. You couldn't put ships on the water because the ports were closed. So all of these were happening simultaneously. So every day you would get a call, you can't get this. Okay, well, some of those things you can reformulate. Some of those things you can't. So smaller companies that are a little more nimble, like me and a whole bunch of my competition, could pivot, change it, work around it. The large companies, like the PPGs of the world, or the Procter and Gambles of the world, they didn't have that option, so the prices went through the roof.
Gotcha.
You know, it takes 6 or 7 months to test an offset for some of these large corporations, and it takes that long to approve it. So they were kind of stuck. And then the other big one that occurred was the silicone shortage. And silicone shortage was caused by the current administration banning slave labor out of China for mining silicone. So what happened was the largest supplier of silicone in the industry was no longer allowed to ship product to the United States. So now all of a sudden you have no silicone available. The other freight issue that was occurring with China is they had a shortage of shipping containers. So there wasn't enough steel to make all the containers. So they had tons and tons of raw materials sitting on port with no containers to put them in, to put on the boats. So it's actually gotten so bad that ships are actually shipping empty shipping containers back to China.
Oh, wow.
So they can reuse them. So before, you know, China would make them, they would package everything, it would ship them here, and then the steel would either get recycled or it would go on some other shipping container going somewhere else. But the trade imbalance is so great right now that there's not enough shipping containers going back to China.
Oh, wow. So instead of reusing them, they're shipping them back to China empty, so they can reload them with stuff and then ship them back here.
Right. So you just doubled your freight cost right there, just shipping the container back.
I wonder how that affects the ship. You know, because the ship is, you know, they stack them pretty high on the ship, but usually the ship is low in the water. But if you've got a bunch of empty containers, you still got a high stack of containers wobbling on the ship.
I have no idea. All I know is most shipping containers have about a 200,000 pound capacity. So a lot of the times those shipping containers have to be offloaded at port because they're too heavy to go straight onto the truck.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
So if you were shipping heavy pieces of equipment, you would have to take it out of the shipping container. Whereas if you were shipping 55-gallon drums, and we've purchased shipping containers before full of materials, not directly, but through distribution, and they'll put 40,000 pounds worth of material on the container, so they can just pick up the container, put it on the flatbed, and drive it off. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. You know, I hadn't really ever thought about the containers. I didn't realize that they sent them here, and then some of them would just get recycled. But I guess that makes sense. I mean, if they're sending way more stuff here than we're sending back.
Well, some people have started making houses out of shipping containers. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
I have. You know what? I have seen that. Or offices, or like on a construction site offices, or in Philadelphia, there's actually a bunch of them that are set up like a food truck cul-de-sac type thing, where it's like a bar and they have each one is a different like restaurant, and so then all people congregate in the middle. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, we have a recycled shipping container at shore right now also. It's where we keep our flammable liquids.
Nice.
So we piped it in for chemical suppression system so we can store flammables there.
Oh, nice. Now, is it? I mean, I imagine it's away from the building.
No, it's in the building.
Oh, it's in the building. Oh.
Well, if you pipe it correctly with a dry chemical system, and you have it inspected by the fire department and the landlord and your insurance agent, yes, you can store flammable liquids as long as they're not bulk in drums in a enclosed area that's got a suppression system.
Oh, cool. Tell us how Ukraine has affected this.
Well, that's an interesting story in itself. Most people say, well, what does the price of sunflower oil have to do in the car wash business? Mm-hmm. Ukraine is the largest exporter of sunflower oil in the world. Mm-hmm. Ironically, those sunflowers originated from the United States and they went over to the Ukraine, but that's a different story. So sunflower oil is primarily used in cooking. When you have a shortage of cooking oil, they will switch to other oils like canola oil, vegetable oil, coconut oil. The thing about the canola oils and the vegetable oils, they're used in biodiesel. Mm. Coconut oil is used in surfactant production. So you have cocoa amides, cocoa betanes, and then you have cationics using coconut because they make coconut fatty acids, which react with different raw materials, and they're used as a natural oil, but because it has a high flash point, it's useful in cooking as well. So by putting a strain on the sunflower oil production, you have impacted the other oil production, which increases certain raw materials.
Actually, I have a question for you about cooking. My sister is a big fan. She tells me about avocado oil all the time. Oh, avocado this, avocado that. Is that another fad, or is that like a real thing?
I've been told that olive oil is supposed to be the best oil for you.
Really?
So I don't know about avocado oil. I've tried it.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of has a funny taste to it. I prefer the walnut oil because it's got a really, really high smoke point. So, but
I've never tried it.
But avocados, that the avocado diet is the big diet nowadays. So who knows?
Yeah.
But the Italians have been doing the olive oil for thousands of years. I think they figured it out.
Yeah. And it's good on just about everything,
Absolutely.
If you got pesto, there's so many good, delicious things with olive oil. Artichoke hearts, olives themselves. All the makings of a good pizza.
Well, and the other thing that I like to do is I'll take a big giant piece of Italian bread, mm-hmm. slice it really thick, paint on some olive oil, and throw it on the grill and make toast.
Have to try that. All right, so let's bring all this talk of oil and supplies, and let's bring it all back to the car wash. So, what is the benefit of a better soap for a car wash owner? Does it save? Does it clean better? Does it save on labor? Does it do what does it do? And how does that happen?
Well, there's 3 ways to wash a car. You can wash a car with labor, mm-hmm. you can wash a car with equipment, and you can wash a car with chemical. And I like to say that labor doesn't have personal issues. Chemicals don't have personal issues. Chemicals don't call off, whereas labor might call off. Equipment is high capital expenditure. Mm-hmm. If you remove labor out of the equation and say, I'm just going to use equipment and soap, mm-hmm. Great equipment can't overcome poor chemistry, but great chemistry can overcome poor equipment. So before you run off and buy a brand new piece of equipment because you can't get something clean, maybe try changing the soap first. Just see what happens.
It's a lot quicker, a lot easier, and a lot less expensive.
Yes.
Now, here's a question that is probably top of mind for a lot of our car wash owners, especially those that have them in different states. Why is it that a soap that works phenomenally in Georgia works awfully in Akron or different parts of the country? Like, why does that happen?
Well, usually it's because of water hardness.
Mm-hmm.
And water hardness varies from location to location. Certain parts of the Midwest have ridiculously hard water. Places near mountains have ridiculously hard water. And then the pH of the water is another equation. So if you have an acid-based product and you have high pH water, it will get partially neutralized during the dilution rates, and then it's not as effective. On the flip side, if you take like City of Pittsburgh water, they claim it's a 7 until it goes through 200-year-old pipes and it shows up about a 5.5. If you're cleaning with an alkaline product with acidic-based water, it will get neutralized and then not work as well as also. But the thing about the water hardness, that data is readily available. If you go to the U.S. Geological Survey, there's a map available showing you the hardness of the water throughout the country. So you should have a pretty good idea of what you're dealing with before you show up. And it also varies whether you're using municipal source or well water. Well water is usually much harder water to deal with, whereas the municipal water, they treat it, they make it easier to work with.
Stuart, can you explain the difference between green, biodegradable, fossil fuel soaps, and what does that actually mean to a car wash owner?
Well, everything's biodegradable. The only variable is time.
Mm-hmm.
And biodegradability only is concerned with carbon-based molecules. So if you have sodium hydroxide, which is a sodium and an OH group, it has no carbon, so it doesn't meet definition of biodegradability. So you're only talking about carbon. So by that definition, cyanide is biodegradable. And it's also naturally occurring, but it's also toxic. So the difference between green and fossil fuel is kind of a gray area. People like to say green, okay, it's renewable. It comes from the ground, we use it for something, and then we return it back to the ground. Whereas fossil fuels, well, they come from the ground, they use it, and then that stuff goes back in the ground. There are certain surfactants that are not biodegradable, and they're not considered green. Something like NPEs, which are nonylphenol ethoxylates. They have a benzene ring on them, well, a phenolic group. They've been banned out of a lot of states. Some people still use them because they're cheap. Mm-hmm. They are effective, but they're not biodegradable. They're marine pollutants. They interfere with reproductive organs in amphibians and fish, and they probably shouldn't be used. Now, you can have biodegradable surfactants that are fossil fuel based, and you can have biodegradable surfactants that are quote-unquote green. So the question is what's your definition of green? If you are clear-cutting a rainforest in Indonesia to plant palm trees, so you can harvest the palm trees, put them on a cargo ship, ship them to Texas so you can make a surfactant out of it, that's a green biodegradable surfactant. But is that the best use of the palm tree? Whereas you could take natural gas or oil out of the ground, make the exact same surfactant locally in Texas, still be biodegradable, but it won't be considered green.
Yeah. One is ruining a forest, getting transported on a ship that burns fuel across the world.
Well, not only that, those ships, they burn 40 gallons of diesel a minute.
Oh, wow.
To transport. And 1 gallon of diesel generates 22 pounds of CO2 into the atmosphere.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So if you think about it, putting stuff on ships, not exactly the best idea.
Yep.
Pipelines, they don't emit anything. You're not putting it on a diesel truck, you're not putting it in a car, you're running it under the ground. That's probably the best use of transportation.
Let's talk about the EPA Safer Choice certification for soaps. Tell us a little bit about that program. Is it Does it work? Is it important to consider for a car wash owner?
Well, we're kind of new to this. So the EPA developed a list of chemicals that you can use in formulating that meet their definition of safer choice. And it's not to say that they are the least harmful materials, but they are safer than alternatives, thus the term safer choice. So basically, what that means is from a health and safety and pollution standpoint, this is the list of the best options. So, and the process is, it's a little bit costly, it's time consuming. You have to make formulations using their list. You have to submit that formula back to the EPA for approval. And you have to demonstrate that it works as well as a equivalent product that's not on the safer choice list. So when we did it, we actually were comparing it against existing formulas to see if it would measure up. So the EPA endorsed those formulations, so we now have 4 for car washing. A low foam, a high foam, one's low pH, the other's high pH, so a total of 4. The thing about the safer choice is you can't say proprietary on the label or the SDS. There are no secrets. All of the raw materials have to be on the label with the CAS number, which is the Chemical Abstract Survey number, which is basically a Social Security number for chemicals. So you have to have full disclosure on it.
Oh, so anyone can copy your formula?
Well, they could. Well, they would know what's in it. I mean, I know every ingredient in Coca-Cola. It's on the can. Can I replicate it? Probably not.
Oh, I got you. So you're, that Social Security number for the chemical, it tells you the building blocks, but not necessarily what the building looks like.
Right. How to put them together.
Gotcha.
All right. Like water has a CAS number. Okay. Now, water's usually the number 1 raw material in most soaps. You don't have to disclose exactly how much water is in the formula. Could be 20%, could be 50%, could be 90%. But you don't have to disclose how much is in it. Now, somebody with a lab, they could boil off the water through a distillation apparatus, capture it, weigh it, and probably get a good idea of how much they have. But we don't have to put, we put 69.374% by weight water into the formula.
Gotcha. So they would basically, if somebody did want to copy it, they would have to reverse engineer it.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
But it would be a lot easier because they have the complete list of the materials right off the bat. So they could target each one of those for a test. Whereas a formulation where you don't know all of the different ingredients, it's much more difficult.
So if you know what's in there, you know that water is going to boil at this temperature, and you get the water out, and then you know the next thing is going to go away with this practice, and then you isolate it, weigh it, and then you just keep going all the way through, and then you can actually define exactly how much of everything that went into the formula.
Correct.
Okay.
Or you could just take the EPA list and make your own.
Yeah. I got to ask about the testing, because you said that it has to perform the same, as well as the non-EPA safer soap. Do they actually do that? Do they take one car and run it through a car wash with one soap and then run a car through with the other soap, or is it in the lab where they just maybe have a couple of dirty panels, or how do you do that?
We did it in the lab and we did it outside. So we didn't actually run it through a car wash because there's certain components within the car wash process that you could never make an EPA safer choice for that we know of yet. One of it is clear coats, drying agents, whatever. They're basically oil and cationic surfactants or silicone or ceramic. But those cationic surfactants that hold that emulsion together aren't on that list. So for us to compare the safer choice products in a car wash wouldn't be practical unless we took off all of the components that we weren't testing. So what we did is there's actually a collision shop that's very close to the new facility. And we walked over and said, any chance we could have a couple pieces of broken car? I'm like, sure, why not? So we grabbed a couple fenders, and we set them up, and you do side-by-side testing. And basically, if you dirty the panel the same way, and you put a piece of tape down the middle, and you do the same test with different chemicals the same way, that is usually sufficient for the EPA testing.
Oh, that's cool. Now, do you just like do a video of you doing the test and then send it to them, or do you just write it up, or like how do you submit that type of information?
We did pictures and write-ups. We didn't do video.
Cool.
It's not very complicated to get the submission, but you have to have data.
Mm-hmm.
And the government seems to like data that's on paper.
I guess, yeah, you can file that a lot easier than a video.
Yes.
Cool. Well, thank you for joining us today, Stuart. Is there anything you'd like to share with our audience before we go?
Only the fact that what I said before, if you think your car's not coming clean, try the soap before you do anything else.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Wash Talk. Today, our guest was Stuart Hammerschmidt from the Shore Corporation. We hope to see you again soon.